One day, Shang Qinghua's concise great system delivered a new command. Become the Anding Peak head disciple within 3 years. He'd already run missions into the outside world and made a good showing under Mo Beijing's, quote, care. But if he wanted to become head disciple, he would also have to pay more than a little attention to affairs within Changqiu Mountain itself. As everyone knew, all the cannon fodder supporting cast in Proud Immortal Demon Way only had an IQ of 40. Therefore, the so-called, quote, palace intrigue was pretty much all at this level. So, the old Anding Peak Lord already had a head disciple. Let's call him A. A was outstanding to the max. Standing meant being master of serving tea, changing water, washing clothes and folding blankets, and that he was considered a dab hand at housekeeping services center. Some days, the old Peak Lord requested that A make 12 delicious flat cakes and send one to each peak. All Shang Qinghua needed to do at such a time was stealthily scatter a ton of salt or sugar on every flat cake that A had meticulously made in order to render them flat out and palatable. Repeat the above process 3 times, and okay, now the old Peak Lord has finally lost all hope in his former senior disciple. Think about it. If you can't even make a good flat cake, what can you possibly do? Now all Shang Qinghua needed to do was display his expert culinary skills a couple of times, and he could successfully ascend. This was called, if you don't have enough IQ, make up for it with stupid plot twists. If you can't do the best, then be the worst. If the plot is so imbecilic that the readers roast it like crazy, that's also a kind of success. In Proud Immortal Demon Way, these type of plots were too numerous to count. The way in which readers flocked together all year round to roast them could have been said to be one of the great spectacles of the Zhongdian comment section. And the fiercest roaster of all was none other than Peerless Cucumber. As Shang Qinghua thought about this, he couldn't help but feel a bit of nostalgia for those comment section companions, and for that one dear friend in particular. He truly missed the force behind those inexhaustible howls that ran along the lines of, quote, airplane shooting towards the sky. It's exactly because you have these kinds of ideas that you're only a third-rate stallion novel writer, unquote. However, as the Anding Peak head disciple, his troubles only increased. For example, in his time as an outer disciple, he never would have had the chance to descend the mountain on a quest with Shen Qingqiu and Liu Jingge. How many fucking lives of disastrous karma must he have lived to draw this super special prize? Changqiu Mountain placed a high emphasis on maintaining kingship between peers. It was common for a handful of head disciples to group up and sally out on side quests every now and again. On this one, the division of labor between the 3 of them was clear. Liu Jingge was the thug hired to be the vanguard, while Shen Qingqiu was in the center, in charge of feigning civility and deploying sneak attacks and finishing blows, as well as waving his fan and being a poser. But don't let anyone know he said that. And Shang Qinghua, naturally, he was the one in charge of driving the carriage, making in reservations, carrying luggage, and managing both the trip's income and expenses. Logistics, you know? If only he had been let off so easily, that would have been great. They say that at night, if you stick your head over the edge of the well and look into its mouth, you'll see your reflection within, looking up as it smiles faintly and beckons. Out of nowhere, it drags people in and drowns them. Sometimes you'll even see your dead relatives. Shang Qinghua coughed. Shen Marshal brother, Liu Marshal brother. Can you let me finish first? He put the scroll down. Shen Qingqiu whisked a book out of his sleeve. He could turn on his poser act anytime and anywhere, sitting or standing. At present, he was leaning on the trunk of an old banyan tree in the shade. putting his magnificent scholarly essence on full display. Meanwhile, Liu Qingge had already gone to stand by the mouth of the well and stuck his head over the edge to look inside. Liu Qingge wanted to wrap things up as fast as possible to avoid having to interact with Shen Qingqiu at any point during the trip, and Shen Qingqiu wanted to let Liu Qingge finish doing all the hard work and get lost as fast as possible. Neither one cared to burden himself with the other's presence. Each had their own considerations, and neither was listening to Shang Qinghua's careful explanation of the mission. Liu Qingge looked back up. It didn't. Shang Qinghua understood. Liu Qingge meant, my reflection didn't smile faintly and beckon to me. He spread his hands. Well, how about we have Shen Marshal Brother go over and have a try? Shen Qingqiu stowed away his book, swapping it for a folding fan. He strolled over to the side of the well. Please step aside. Liu Qingge had already stepped aside, a good dozen paces. Shen Qingqiu carelessly took a look into the well, but this also seemed to yield no results. Shang Qinghua flipped through the scroll, paper rustling. That's so strange. This clearly said... The unfortunate thing was, no matter how hard he rustled the paper, he couldn't drown out the sound of Shen Qingqiu's malicious question. We both tried. Isn't it your turn? Sure enough, in this world, even the monsters bully the weak and fear the strong. When the other two had looked, they hadn't seen a damn thing. But when it was Shang Qinghua's turn, he clearly saw his own reflection coquettishly waving its hand. Without another word, Liu Qingge smacked his sword's hilt. In a powerful arc, Chen Luan's sword flew from its sheath and rushed into the well. After a moment of silence, the tranquil surface of the water began to churn and bubble. Shang Qinghua scrupulously took a step back, then another, retreating a safe distance away, only to hear a burst of ghastly wailing before a giant wispy blob of spirits spewed out of the well and shot into the sky. Liu Qingge smashed apart the clump of women's heads that were chasing and biting at him. Get back! Usually, once the fighting started, any Anding Peak disciples not in charge of replenishing supplies were supposed to scram as far away as possible and hang back at a safe location. Unfortunately, Shang Qinghua had miscalculated and didn't scram far enough. All his means of egress were blocked by the resentful spirits, which had taken the form of a white haze. Now that things had come to this, he could only bust out his special ability. His eyes rolled back into his head and he collapsed on the spot. Playing dead was a time-tested technique, okay? In the chaos of battle, Liu Qingge and Shen Qingqiu accidentally pressed their backs together, and their faces simultaneously contorted with looks of revulsion. Shen Qingqiu had already shot out a spiritual blast, which brushed by Liu Qingge's shoulder as it passed. Liu Qingge, angered, immediately retaliated with a blow. Great. The entirety of their combat forces were now ignoring the enemy in order to fight amongst themselves. Are you blind? Shen Qingqiu yelled. What are you hitting? Liu Qingge wasn't any more polite. Who hit first? Who went blind first? Shang Qinghua lay on the ground, eyes still rolled back. He had clearly seen when, moments ago, a faint white shadow peeked out from behind Liu Qingge. Shen Qingqiu's attack had passed Liu Qingge's shoulder to disperse it. As he watched, the blows his peers rained down on each other grew fiercer and fiercer, their eyes going red with bloodlust. Forgetting to play dead, he sat up and called weakly. You guys, don't fight. Liu Marshal Brother, you misunderstood. In fact, Shen Marshal Brother was just... Shen Qingqiu flung out his hand, and several deep, deep cracks were smashed into the wall by Shan Qinghua's head. Dust and pebbles streamed down. "If you are going to die, then die completely," Shen Qingqiu said icily. "Don't change your mind halfway." Without another word, Shan Qinghua collapsed and went back to contentedly playing dead. At last, they sealed away the well creature and all the resentful spirits it had collected in a retrieval vessel, not missing a single one. Shan Qinghua led over the cart and horse. Without sparing them a single glance, Liu Jingge took off down a different road. Shan Qinghua said hurriedly, "Little marshal brother, where are you going?" Liu Jingge snorted. "I will not journey alongside a backstabbing colleague." Shen Qingqiu clapped his hands and smiled. "How wonderful! For my part, I don't care to journey alongside someone who's all brawn, no brains. Shao marshal brother, let's go." He grasped Shan Qinghua's shoulder, and Shan Qinghua squeaked in agreement through teeth clenched in pain. Finally, struggling free of Shen Qingqiu's evil clutches, he caught up with Liu Jingge to caution him. "Liu marshal brother, as your marshal brother, I have a word of advice to offer. Don't cultivate by yourself all the time. It's easy to fall into a qi deviation." Liu Jingge still hadn't responded when on the other road, Shen Qingqiu used the base of his fan to rap on the rails of the cart. Shan Qinghua hurried back. The whole way home, he watched Shen Qingqiu closely while driving the cart. Shen Qingqiu was leaning on the side of the carriage reading a book, but under Shan Qinghua's stare, his expression grew darker and darker. He narrowed his eyes. "What are you staring at me for?" "Shen marshal brother, I really wasn't going to say anything," Shan Qinghua said timidly. "But since you've asked me so sincerely, then you're holding your book upside down." In a split second, Shen Qingqiu's face reddened. He abruptly rose and drew his sword. No. Don't do anything rash." Shen Qingqiu had the thinnest face. If you tore down his pretenses right in front of him, he would remember you for a lifetime. Shan Qinghua was already regretting the quip. But if a person like Shen Qingqiu, who had perfected the art of poserhood, was holding his book upside down, he really had to be incensed. That sounded about right. He had gone to all that trouble to do a good thing, but the result hadn't met his expectations. But if that was the problem, then he should just go and explain himself to Liu Jingge. Just admit he was trying to help out. But Shen Qingqiu wouldn't do it. "If you won't do it, just let me help you explain," thought Shan Qinghua. But Shen Qingqiu wouldn't compromise his own pride. Maybe he was too embarrassed. People really shouldn't twist themselves into knots. That's just self-torture, Shan Qinghua thought. Shen Qingqiu stared at him with a vicious gaze, and cold sweat flowed down Shan Qinghua's back. After a while, Shen Qingqiu finally sat back down and sheathed his sword. With great effort, he composed himself, then said with a superficial smile, "Shan Qinghua, shut up, all right?" Shan Qinghua's heart itched ferociously. He raised a hand. "Can I say one more thing?" Shen Qingqiu rubbed his temple with his right hand, then lifted his chin to indicate permission to speak. Shan Qinghua looked at him with an earnest gaze, then spoke the most meaningful and heartfelt string of words he had spoken since an electric current had shocked him into proud immortal demon way. "If, in the future, you see someone fall into a qi deviation, Don't panic and don't rush up rashly thinking you can save them. You must stay calm and call for help. Don't try to do it yourself. If you don't, you will definitely be more of a hindrance than anything, and you'll make a big mess, and you'll abandon yourself to despair from there on. You'll never be free of it for the rest of your life. Even jumping into the Yellow River won't wash you clean. Shen Qíyù was mystified. If someone else fell into qi deviation, what would that have to do with me? Why would I panic? Why would I want to help? Shan Qinghua's face was the definition of, I knew you'd say that. Either way, just make sure you remember, Shan Qinghua added. Once Shan Qinghua became the Peak Lord, he at long last no longer needed to bow and scrape to anyone. A busy life was still a busy life, but at least he had been promoted from, quote, exploited servant girl to, quote, head of internal affairs. This totally counted as rapid progress in long steps. Apparently, that particular person on Qingjing Peak, whom no one could afford to offend, had fallen ill. After he recovered, a secret meeting was held on Qiongjing Peak. In the side hall of Qiongjing Peak, 10 of the 12 Peak Lords were present and accounted for. Do you feel that Qingqiu, Marshal Brother, has been very odd these past few days? Yue Qingyuan asked, completely focused on the topic. Several Peak Lords agreed. More than just odd, said Liu Qingge in a solemn tone. He's practically a whole different person, muttered Qi Qingqi. Just then, Shan Qinghua stepped into the side hall, worn and weary from travel. Over the past few years, Qiancao Peak's dragon bone cantaloupe seeds had been selling quite well outside the sect, and he had already spent several months rushing about on sales trips. He had been dragged into this mysterious meeting as soon as he got back, and he still didn't quite understand the situation. He rubbed his hands together. About that, I haven't seen Shen, Marshal Brother, for a few days. Could everyone please elaborate? How exactly has he been odd? He had a calm and harmonious conversation with me for a whole 2 hours, said Yue Qingyuan. Shan Qinghua was both speechless and terrified. Ayah, my God, how odd! That really is very odd. Ordinarily speaking, the bridge between these two was impassably burned. Without rebuilding the bridge, there was absolutely no chance of harmonious developments. Thus far, the T-5 sentences until they part on terrible terms rule had held true as a baseline normal. A whole 2 hours worth of calm and harmonious exchange, this was more than a fantastical level of progress. In the Lingxi caves, he helped me, said Liu Qingge. Shan Qinghua finally remembered. Right. By now, Shen Qingqiu should already have, quote, helped Liu Qingge to his death. So how could Liu Qingge still be hanging about, sitting here to attend a meeting? Was it possible that the warning Shan Qinghua had given Shen Qingqiu after defeating the well creature had actually made an impact? The other Peak Lords continued to list Shen Qingqiu's every behavioral oddity over the last few days. Sustaining injury while beating back an impetuous demoness, this, stepping forward to protect his disciples and showing care and concern, that. Shan Qinghua's face began to twitch. He thought it over back and forth, but no matter how he looked at it, this kind of altruistic, self-sacrificing character behavior was seriously OOC. Unable to resist, he said, Wait, he couldn't have been possessed, could he? Wait, Marshal Brother, how is your Sword Trials Terrace? Did he visit? at the sword trials terrace of Wei Qingwei's Wanjian Peak, there was a mystical sword known as Hongjing, which no person had even been able to draw. But if something like a resentful soul or evil spirit were to approach this blade, it unsheathed of its own accord. If Shen Qingqiu really had been possessed by some impure creature, as long as he approached the sword trials terrace, Hongjing would emphatically sound the alarm. However, Wei Qingwei said, "He went 3 times and tried to draw it every one, and there was absolutely no sign of movement." "There is no demonic energy in his body," Yue Qingyuan said slowly. "I could detect no signs that he has been possessed." Qi Qingqi spread her hands. "It doesn't make any sense for him to be possessed. Possession at least involves some sort of goal, but he hasn't been doing anything. He's even more idle than before." After the discussion session, they remained unable to reach a decision. In the end, Mo Qingfan said, "It's not necessarily a case of possession. In my opinion, perhaps Shen Marshall Brothers' old problem has appeared." All the Peak Lords looked at each other. What this, quote, old problem was didn't need to be said out loud. Everyone understood. Shen Qingqiu, as a person, was ambitious and aggressive, proud and arrogant. This wasn't the first time he'd tried to force instant success. Maybe he had gone off to cultivate in secret again and had ended up falling into a qi deviation. Mo Qingfan continued his analysis. "I have heard of quite a few of such cases. When a person is hit on the head with a large rock, or if they perhaps suffered a violent shock, sometimes they lose a few of their memories of the past. So it's not necessarily impossible for someone to fall into a qi deviation and forget their past, thus leading to their temperament to undergo major changes. Then, is it possible to recover?" Yue Qingyuan asked. Qi Qingqi wrinkled her nose. "Zhangmen Marshall Brother, do you actually hope he'll remember and recover his previous character and conduct?" Yue Qingyuan started. "Me, I cannot say." It was earnestly. "Even though the way he is now is overall very good as well, if he can remember, it will be for the better." "Oh, before, he never offered a proper greeting when he met sect leader or his fellow sect members," one of the other Peak Lords said in confusion. "He never visited us at our homes, and when he spoke, it was all needles concealed in silk floss, full of biting sarcasm. What was good about that? The way he is now is quite an improvement." Yue Qingyuan smiled faintly, but he did not speak. "The last time I went to write his prescription for without a cure, I examined him," Mo Qingfan said awkwardly. "There were no significant symptoms, so it would be difficult to know where to begin. I'm afraid we can only let nature take its course." The quote, "Qingjing Peak Lord has lost his memory, celebrate and spread the joyful news," unquote. The meeting adjourned. After this meeting concluded, Shang Qinghua felt he was very much obligated to investigate these strange happenings, in passing while delivering Qingjing Peak's funds. But before Shang Qinghua started his investigation, he went to Baizhan Peak. Normally speaking, in terms of seniority, Qingjing Peak was ranked 2nd in Changqiu Mountain, and Baizhan Peak was ranked 7th. After making his deliveries to the first-ranked Qiongling Peak, his next stop should have been Qingjing. But, on the one hand, Shen Qingqiu was too hard to please, and Shang Qinghua had to rack his brains every time he went to figure out how not to offend him. On the other hand, Baizhan Peak loved fighting, so Shang Qinghua felt safer giving them their funds first. Safer how? It was precisely the sense of safety a small shop owner felt when handing his protection fee to the local gang boss. The one who greeted him was Liu Qingge's younger martial brother, qíyù, who was as enthusiastic as always. The two exchanged some small talk, and after the handover was complete, qíyù said, "Shang martial brother, take care. I'm returning to the training grounds." When Shang Qinghua realized that qíyù seemed reluctant to see him leave, he said, "Little martial brother has been staying at Baizhan Peak more often lately. Has any martial brother had a sudden increase in cultivation?" Liu Qingge spent all his time in the outside world looking for people to fight. No one on Baizhan Peak was a match for him, and he typically only came back once a month at most. Whenever Baizhan Peak's disciples and juniors flocked to Qiancao Peak to seek treatment, that meant he had just returned. But lately, Qiancao Peak's doorsteps had nearly been trampled flat by those great lords from Baizhan Peak, and the medicinal funds were getting tight. Mo Qingfan had started to ask Shang Qinghua for loans every few days, which Shang Qinghua found strange. He couldn't help but wonder, had an extraordinary genius who could stand up to Liu Qingge appeared on Baizhan Peak? So he asked. qíyù dropped in gloom. "It's not our peak. It's Shenqingqiu." Shang Qinghua hadn't expected any earth-shattering news, so he just smiled and nodded. "Oh, Shenqingqiu. Ah. Huh? Shenqingqiu?" As Shang Qinghua digested the enormous amount of information contained in those two words, he was almost ascended out of shock on the spot. Shenqingqiu at Baizhan Peak? At the Baizhan Peak training grounds, no less? Doing what? Getting a one-sided beatdown from Liu Qingge? Given his skill in drawing aggro, it was probably a group beatdown. But what if it became fatal? He's an important Scum villain, you know. If he gets beaten to death, who's going to torment Bingge? "Shang, martial brother, what's that look in your eye?" qíyù asked after a silence. "Don't look at me like that. We didn't kill anyone. Shenqingqiu is still alive, and no one's done anything to him. You should be asking what he did